Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us here. My name is Jim Atkinson. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for RedTeam Software. And again, I just want to thank all of you guys for being here. I know we know intimately this is busy times in construction season. I'm sure all of your schedules are very crazy, so the fact that you're investing time with us here today is much appreciated. And again, I'm saying that on behalf of the folks from RedTeam in the room. I know you guys have relationships with RedTeam members elsewhere. We're spread out all around the country. We're a remote first work environment, which has got some great things about it. But one thing I will say is we value the relationship we have with each and every one of you. And again, we're going to do our best to make the time you're investing with us here today well worth your while. So on that note, we have some phenomenal content lined up, delivered by some equally phenomenal guest speakers. We've got some guest speakers from the industry at large, kind of subject matter experts and thought leaders in areas like AI. We've got Hugh Seaton joining us here today to talk about AI. We've got Jay Snyder joining us to talk about how to get more from your project management platform by connecting it with ERP. We've got some just thought leaders and subject matter experts from you, our clients, speaking on our behalf today, joining some panels, and then I think finally we've got some educational sessions, some instructional sessions led by RedTeam's own in-house construction experts, including Michael Wright, our founder and Chief Strategy Officer, who's going to lead a session here a little bit later. Mike is still a practicing commercial general contractor out of Orlando, Florida. So he not only sells software and develops software for the industry, he actually uses it. And I think that's a big differentiator for RedTeam when you compare us to other folks in the industry. We really have a lot of our personnel in the organization that has deep roots in construction. They've lived the lives, kind of walked the job sites, kind of face the challenges and the opportunities all of you guys face every day on your job. So they bring that wealth of knowledge to work every day with them to kind of figure out how does our software adapt to the challenges and actually meet the opportunities that you guys face out in the field. They help us design services around those because we know it's not just about the software, it's about how you implement the software, and I know we're going to have some sessions on that. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to one of those born and raised construction experts, Tracy Van Dalsum. She's the Vice President of our Go product line. Was an acquisition that we made out of Nashville back in 2022, the very beginning of 2022. She comes from construction as well. So she's going to be your MC for the day and take you through the rest of the program. So, thank you.
All right, welcome everybody. We're so glad that you're here with us today. I've got some housekeeping items that I'm going to go over so that Alicia doesn't get mad at me. But before Hugh comes up, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our program for today. We are going to be streaming on YouTube our session with Hugh, which is coming up next. So if you have anybody that wants to join that from your office, if they weren't able to attend today, they can scan the QR code and you can send that to them and they can join live for that session. We are going to be recording all the other sessions that are going to come out of this room today just for our own internal purposes, but just wanted to make you aware that we are going to be recording them. So, and this is the, how do we say this name? Obelisk room? Obelisk? Obelisk. I'm going to get it right. I mean, it's hard to say. And we've got 2 training sessions that are going to be coming up later this afternoon at 1 o'clock, and they're going to be taking place in the rooms that are, if you go out these doors and take a left, they're going to be the next 2 rooms. We're going to have a training session for Flex at 1 o'clock and a training session for Go, and we'll talk about those a little bit more. But we do have some fun prizes that we're going to be giving away today. We have a construction-themed necklace that we're going to be giving away, and then we also have training sessions. How many of you have had in-person training with one of our implementation specialists? Nobody. So you've got an opportunity to win a free on-site training with one of our implementation specialists. They're going to come to you. You're going to be able to help build the agenda, and sometime this summer we'll come visit you guys in person and do some on-site training and consulting with you. So there are some boxes in the back for you to drop your business cards, and we're going to draw for those at 4:30 this afternoon during our happy hour time, and give those away. And let's see, we've got some breaks that are coming up at the tail ends of each of our sessions this morning at 9:45 and 10:45 before lunch. And then we'll have some breaks in our afternoon session this afternoon, and you'll find some snacks and refreshments right outside the doors out here where you got your breakfast. So look for those at our break times. The restrooms, very important. If you go out the doors to the right and take another right by the registration and go up the stairs, they're on your right. So right? Okay. Okay. Well, we're going to invite Hugh Seaton up to talk with us this morning. Hugh has been in our industry for many years, first as a contractor and now on the consulting side at the Link. Michael Wright is going to be the co-founder, well, he is the founder of RedTeam Software. He's going to be joining Hugh at the end of Hugh's session today for a little bit of Q&A, but we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, which is a hot topic on everybody's minds, and how are we going to be incorporating this into the construction industry. And so Hugh is going to talk to us a little bit about that this morning, and then we're going to have that time for question and answer, and then we'll take our first break. All right, Hugh.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. Today I want to talk about AI, which is obviously a topic we hear a lot about, but what I find is we're often talking about this as if we already know what we're talking about. So people skip over the part where they even define what AI is. We often talk about what it might do, and I find that people start with the scary bits or start with the kind of super duper bits. So let's talk a little bit about what we're even talking about. Just real quick about me, obviously CEO of the Link AI. I've been building things with AI, both the deep learning kind and the more modern kind, for about a decade. Before that, spent a bunch of years in the Construction Specifications Institute, do some podcasts and some webinars, and wrote a book. So I have a big mouth and I love to talk about this stuff. So congratulations, you get to hear it. So we're going to start with the basic question. What are we even talking about? What is AI? Now, I find too often that this is what you see. We see shiny robots that look like people, but they're better. And unfortunately, I find that really distracting for a number of reasons. So let's start with the fact that it's not this. This is not AI. AI is not a shiny robot that is you but better, or you but smarter, or you but more ethical, or you but more whatever. There's a really simple definition that helps us to think about AI in a much more useful way. Because if you're thinking, oh, this thing's going to come in and it can automate this and it can do what humans can do, if your starting point is anchoring AI on a digital human, it's not going to help you, because you're going to be saying to yourself, well, a human might do this or that. A better way of thinking about it is, let's start with 3 parts. It's software that can do some unique things without explicit programming. So in other words, all the rest of the software, all the non-AI, whether it's Excel, whether it's your phone, whether it's whatever, everything it does, every button you push, somewhere in there's a line, or usually a bunch of lines of code that are telling it to do that. The point of AI is you can train it to do things. So it can do really fuzzy stuff. So the distinction often is, if you've got pretty well-defined things like, again, a spreadsheet, or you press a button, you want it to do a thing. Classic software is really good at that. But when you've got things like someone's face, or someone's voice, or a construction document that's sloppy, I'm not sure that ever happens, but in case it ever does, AI might be one of those moments where it can take a fuzzier input and do something with it. So that's why a lot of this excitement right now is that the real world is a lot messier than the world of spreadsheets. So to be able to go out into the real world and do things with messy inputs, AI opens up a bunch of doors that classic software typically struggled with. So those are the 3 things I'd like you to remember. First of all, it's software. It's not magical stuff. It's not a digital human or all the other crazy stuff you hear people talking about. It can do things that other software can't, and you don't have to program it. So those are the 3 things that make it different from other software. Relatedly, it's math, it's not magic. So when people talk about things, I hear them speaking in terms of where it's going to go, and it's going to take everyone's job, and which there's no historical reason to believe that that's true. This is the first time we've had pretty powerful stuff. It may change jobs, and it will, but keep in mind, it's not magic. So you don't sprinkle AI. I literally have heard people say that. You don't sprinkle AI on something, Anyway. The other thing, so that's kind of point 1. We're talking about software. It's different. Now, one of the things that's also, as consumers of AI and people who are undoubtedly going to be pitched about AI, I know because I do some of that pitching, it's worth keeping in mind that classic software, again, the Excel, the Sage, the RedTeam, it's really good at being reliable to do the thing you told it to do. This is the RedTeam now. Of course, we're going to expand and do all sorts of AI coming. But right now, the point is when you're talking about classic software, it very often is really good at the thing you've got it doing, and it's stupid to put AI in just because it's AI. And the reason why that I use the word stupid is because that the fact that it's based on instructions means it's really predictable, or it's a bug. If it's not predictable, you go fix it, you make it predictable. The goal is to make it so I press a button, it always does that thing. I add 2, it's always whatever the number was plus 2 every single time. In contrast, because we're putting a bunch of data through a training mechanism with AI, it's based on probabilities. The image I have here is from, actually kind of old, from some of you may have seen this where they talk about machine vision or computer vision. They'll kind of put a box around something. The reason I put that here is all of these have percentages. And you don't always see that. You don't always see that behind the scenes AI is based on a percentage, based on a probability, but it always is. This is why none of you took a Tesla self-driving car here. At least if you did, you were doing the driving, not the Tesla. Because the probability of otherwise known as accuracy, still isn't quite where we need it to be, even after untold billions and lots of data. So the upshot of that is that, probability brings along with it some risk. So the default setting should be, if classic software can do it, we should use that. If we're using AI, we should have a reason why we needed AI, not something else. Because it brings along with it a little bit of unpredictability. Now, it's the job of a software company to say, how do we put kind of a ring around that unpredictability and make it useful so that it's not kind of the Wild West. But nevertheless, the key point here is AI is not a silver bullet. It's not going to come through and replace all software. It's going to augment a lot of software, but it's not going to replace everything because classic software still does a lot of things really, really well, and it's not going anywhere. So that's sort of a high-level view. Now we kind of have an idea. We're talking about software. It's not every software. It's a particular class. It's good for some things when the world is real fuzzy. The next thing I think is important to understand is in the world right now, there are really 2 types of AI. Now, you talk to a specialist, they'll tell you, of course, there's more, but 2 things I want you to know about. One of them has been around for about a decade, and that's deep learning. So when Siri started working and facial recognition, all this stuff that's been around for like a decade, that's deep learning. And typically deep learning is tons of data. It'll do things like classify something, but usually one thing at a time. Now, you may not see it one thing at a time because it's so fast, but it's pretty limited, and it's able to, again, recognize a face. It can tell your voice. It can do things that you've seen usually in the background of something else. It's usually not something you're directly dealing with, except talking to. The new thing now is generative AI. And for me, this feels a lot like when the internet started in 94 and 95, because it's just so cool, and you can go right in and you can play with it. Then after a little while, you're like, I'm not so sure what I'm going to do with this, but my gosh, it's cool. If you've used ChatGPT, that's often the experience. Then a little while later, you sort of figure it out. It also is kind of a flavor of deep learning. It's more detail than you need. They did something in terms of how it's created that makes it particularly special. It's also just massive. The difference here is deep learning typically is baked in something else and you don't touch it directly. It just makes another product better. Generative AI can deal with much bigger things. It can deal with paragraphs. It can write things for you. It can create things, which deep learning couldn't. And often you're able to interact with it directly. That's why there's all this buzz. That's why I'm even talking to you today. So the reason why that matters is when someone's talking about our company, you hear this in construction all the time, our company doesn't have enough data to do AI, or our data's not clean enough. Very true with deep learning. It's why almost no that I know of contractor has built a deep learning model on their own. They're usually grabbing it from someone else and tuning it and training it or whatever. Generative AI, on the other hand, can work on a document. You don't need to suddenly say our data's not clean enough or not big enough or whatever. You can use things immediately. And a lot of companies are, a lot of people are, whether it's helping you write an email, whether it's helping you kind of go through a PDF, or we have a product that does that with specs. But the point is, suddenly data quantity and quality isn't the barrier that it was for deep learning. And that's important because I think if you don't know that these 2 things are different, you can get confused in that conversation where a valid point about we should go through our old jobs and clean up the data so we can do things, that's valid beyond AI. That's valid just for analytics. But it shouldn't stop you from thinking about generative AI. You can do interesting things with the documents that you have now. or not even the documents. Sometimes you may just say, hey, upload 2 examples of an RFI, and it can then start drafting new ones for you based on some simple inputs. And you'll find that generative AI often is really useful for what I call the blank sheet of paper problem. Very often when you need to start writing an email, and maybe it's the 5th in a row, you're like, I gotta start, I guess, as opposed to having a first draft, even if the draft sucks, it's a good starting point. It gets you momentum. And I find that the blank sheet of paper problem is where generative AI is often very easy place to start. So what are the challenges of using it? So, again, you often are hearing how wonderful this stuff is, and it's going to change your life, your back's not going to hurt, your marriage is going to be great. What is our challenges with it? The biggest challenges right now with generative AI is, first of all, people are using it like it's Google. So if you're using who here's been using ChatGPT or something like that? Excellent. So if you have not, they've made their best model free now. So if you haven't yet, I would jump on and just play with it. What I would suggest though is once you've gotten a little comfortable with it, start actually watch a couple YouTube videos about how to prompt. Prompting is basically how you ask a question. So instead of Googling it, you're prompting it. And the point is, most people use ChatGPT and all the rest of this as if it were Google. So they're asking questions and they get answers, which is totally valid. But there's a lot more value if you treat it like a chatbot. Like you can ask, it gives you an answer and it maybe isn't quite what you want. You don't have to start all over again. Tell it, do a better job. Like, literally say, did that answer my question? Sometimes it will say, no, actually there was more than this or something. So the point is they called it a chatbot for a reason. So I encourage you to try the second question and the third. I find by the 4th and 5th question, it runs out of gas and gets a little confused, but certainly up to 3 or 4 questions, you're often getting better answers because it's remembering the questions and its answers when it answers the next question, if that makes sense. So it remembers what you just said. And if that annoys you, you just click new chat and it'll forget everything. The big risk that you hear people talking about with modern AI is that we're going to treat it like it's a human and we're going to trust it before it's ready. So the whole thing about human in the loop, anyone heard that term, human in the loop? Now you have. Aren't you glad you came? Human in the loop is basically saying you don't trust AI to behave on its own. There's always a human there checking it. And that is the big danger, is it looks so good that people will often take its output and say, well, we're done, we're awesome, that's great. The analogy I like to hear, the story I like to tell is there's a couple of lawyers who have had some trouble because they had ChatGPT write their closing arguments, including case law. Now the problem with generative AI is it's trained on really good stuff, so its outputs look really professional. So this lawyer was like, this is legit, quoted some case law that was fake. It had made it up. But the thing is, all the cues that we use to say that's you're an idiot. Usually it's badly formatted, there's spelling things, it's grammars, whatever. It writes like a PhD even though it's full of beans. So one of them got disbarred, another one got a $5,000 fine apparently. So the point is, we want to keep people involved even when for 50 times in a row it looked amazing. It's important as we develop and use this stuff to make sure that there's a human who's consuming it. It isn't just going straight from the AI out to a customer or, God forbid, an AHJ or something like that. In contrast, deep learning, the biggest issue is data. This is why you heard about that for so long. And I like to say in professional services, usually it's either you get cost, quality, or time. You get 2 of them. Kind of like that here with deep learning. You either have, I don't know, let's turn green here, but you either have a lot of data, you have a smaller problem, or you have less accuracy. Those are kind of, one of them has to give. You either make the problem smaller, or you go get a bunch of data, or you say, I can live with 90% accuracy, not 95. Does that make sense? It's a little, for those of you who remember statistics, first of all, I'm sorry, but it's actually very similar to statistics. You're ultimately saying the more data you have, the more accurate you can be, and you can answer bigger questions. It's a little like that. One of the points that people talk about with AI is that, and this is a problem for folks who, like you, who will be making decisions about it, is, sorry, hopefully you can see this as a curve. As your accuracy goes up, the amount of data you need more, a little more, a little more, a little more. Then when you get closer to like 80% and so on, it starts to climb really high. And the reason for that is because here it's controlled environment. It's like, that's why everyone was so excited about self-driving cars, because when the problem is kind of simple, it worked really well, but then they put it out in the world with, you know, kids wearing black at night when it's, you know, windy. Suddenly you got all these edge cases. So edge cases are a term we use in software to say that the thing that doesn't happen often but still happens. Well, construction is like the definition of edge cases, right? I know. And that's also why a lot of you are going to have a job for as long as you want one. But the point is that if you're okay with it being accurate here, then you probably do have enough data. But if you need this thing to stand on its own with no human there, you need 99.9. It really takes a long time. Back to our self-driving cars problem. That's why you don't have one yet, is that there are billions and billions of data points and we're still not quite there. So this is kind of what I mentioned a moment ago. How are we going to trust AI? And the key thing I'd like you to take away is that because AI is not a human, it's not a human brain, it's not a digital version of a human brain, it isn't going to fail like a human would. So any manager anywhere has a model in their mind of how the people that work with them, for them, or are part of their delivery might screw up. You know it's because they didn't read a thing, they forgot a thing, they ran out of time, whatever it is. You have an idea of how humans make mistakes. But because AI doesn't work like we do, often you're going to get distracted or fooled by it. So, not to get too deep in this, but we have this theory of mind. That's what I meant by that. We have an idea of how the human mind works, so we can kind of predict things. This fails us with AI because it doesn't work like the human mind does. The key point here is humans have a model of the world. We walk around with a basic idea of how things should work, and when it doesn't work, we try to figure out why. AI is the opposite. It's actually taking what it's seen and saying, okay, I understand the world based on just what you showed me. So does that make sense? So it doesn't have it doesn't have common sense, is another way of saying it. Like our model of the world it shows up usually as common sense or gut or intuition. AI doesn't work fundamentally doesn't work like that. It will only look at the things you give it and make a decision on that. Now, that means that you would think a human would make the decision because their model of the world was wrong or something. So again, it'll lead you astray. In contrast, AI won't, and often the problem is because we think the way we do, we won't even ask about the data. So the example that I use, there's a lot of times when you're learning deep learning especially, they'll have you make a model of dog breeds because there's great data out there for that. So there was this team that was doing this, and what they found is the thing kept getting wrong huskies and wolves. Humans with our top-down view of the world would say, well, they look alike, right? The shape of the mouth, the eyes, the whole thing, I mean, sort of. Turned out that was not why AI got it wrong. AI got it wrong because most of the photos of huskies and most of the photos of wolves had snow behind them. Like, I never would have guessed that. They had to go in and look at the model. So the point is, there was bias in the data that they didn't know to even look for. Because a human's going to be focused on the foreground. They're going to be focused on the point of the picture, not whether there are trees or leaves or snow or whatever. This illustrates the fact that sometimes AI is going to screw up in a way you never would have thought of because you don't think like it does. And frankly, it's really, really hard for someone to have gone through this data, which is millions of data points, and said, oh, wait, it looks like we've got too much snow. Like, who would have thought to do that? That's why you need humans in the loop. A human to catch a mistake, and our gut, our model of the world will say, hang on, that doesn't look right. Then you look into why and you realize why. That make sense? And the reason why that's relevant for us is when you think about how humans work, we're going to need people around no matter how good the AI gets for a while. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more. We're coming to the end here. All right, but we're not going to do it again. How does this relate to project delivery? It's really moving fast. The key thing I wanted to say is that I think what you're going to wind up finding is that AI winds up replacing a lot of paperwork. It's already pretty good at that. We have a product where it'll go through specs for you, but there are other things out there that'll look at contracts and so on. And some of the ways that you're going to find it valuable: no more blank sheets of paper, I mentioned before. Minimizing tedious search and summarizing, so going through the enormous number of documents that any contract or that any project has, and finding what you need, whether it's RFIs, change orders, specs, so on. I think you're going to be able to analyze jobs a lot faster. So we hear this a lot. Smaller contractors especially often get a lot of bids that they need to manage pretty quickly. The things that are not the most valuable thing you do, but are still necessary, typically are paperwork or so on. And I think you're going to find that a lot. The question that you'll be asking is, What if we could automate paperwork? What if we could overnight have a bunch of interns checking our paperwork against itself to make sure if there's any inconsistencies we could flag? You'd never pay to do that, but you can get AI to do that, certainly in the near future. So I think one of the ways that you can imagine positive change coming is our documents and our information. If it's not that it's going to make it automatically make your back pain go away, but at least you'll be aware of it in a way that you otherwise wouldn't have the resources to do. I think that you're going to find the economics of project delivery and the industry change. That's a big statement that I don't have time to dig into too much, but I'm easy to find. I want to finish with the big questions, two things. Is AI coming for your job? This is the one everyone wants to ask, and this is the fear we have. And the problem that we have very often with this question is people look at what it can do, assume that whatever that thing is the whole thing that a job is, and say that's going to go replace that guy that does the thing or that woman that does the thing. The problem is real jobs don't work like that. Real jobs actually have tons of decisions, intuition, and experience that make you good at something. And AI is terrible at that. The analogy I like to use, the story, is for those of you, I definitely remember when ATMs first came out. And the thing is, when ATMs first came out, everyone said, oh my gosh, there's never going to be bank tellers anymore. What really happened was there you go, ATMs took away the least valuable thing that bank tellers do, which is just dispensing cash. And it said, we're going to push this over here, and in fact created a whole new revenue stream with the fees that we all love so much. But what it did do is it freed up bank tellers to do more high-value things, working with small business and so on. It really changed how small businesses are able to access banks, or certainly how frequently. What wound up happening is actually there are more bank tellers than there used to be, because it made them more valuable. It made them not covering really low value and some high value things. It focused them on things that are high value, which made the branches more profitable, which meant there were more branches. I'm not saying that this is automatically going to happen. I do think it's a good analogy for a lot of jobs in construction where some of the least valuable things people do take up a lot of time. Shuffling paper, checking a thing, looking for information. Obviously, it's a little more true in the junior levels than the senior levels, but I think what we're going to find is that there's a lot of room for the least valuable things to be automated so people can spend more time on the high value things. So I'm actually going to just end here. What you can do, and we'll talk a little more about this, is avoid the hype. So that's why I started this whole thing. We're not talking about digital humans. We're not talking about robot superhumans. What we are talking about is a tool that can do interesting things, and it's going to continue to get more powerful. I would, for those of you who have teams, I'd have somebody get pretty good at prompting. It's tons of content on Udemy and YouTube and so on. It isn't really that hard. It's just a little counterintuitive. And I'd get out there and try some things. I have a webinar once a month. I get somebody to come and talk to me about AI specific to construction. Usually it's someone with a product that's using AI. Who knows, we may have a RedTeam person soon. I dive into a bunch of this stuff. It's free and so on. If you find my name on YouTube, you'll be able to find them. So there's a lot of good content out there. I just would avoid the hype, and I think this is going to actually be a good thing for the construction industry. But like anything else, it's going to take a little adjustment. So with that, I think Michael and I are going to do a little bit of Q&A. We got about 15 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. I'm going to start with a couple observations, and good morning, everybody. My first observation is this is actually the third time I've heard you do this presentation, and quite honestly, I get more out of it each time I hear it. And so we're going to have this on demand, Alicia. So we'll share with you the link so that you can, the link to this presentation. And I would suggest to you, if you want to go back and review it, I think that would be really helpful. And also you might want to share it with other people. This is a really interesting topic. It's really present for us in the construction industry. We're surrounded by this, and quite frankly, our kids probably know more about this than we do. And so I want to appreciate the fact that Hugh's really a voice for our industry. He's a prolific podcaster. I've been looking at a lot of his podcasts online. He's saying a lot of really great things about how AI affects us in a very tangible way. And I wanted to start off with maybe this. We're going to have Q&A for a few minutes here. So, and I know you've got questions because some of the conversations I had with you before the session started. I know there's a lot of interest in this topic. But I wanted to start off and just ask you to maybe tell us where you think the construction industry is going with AI. What does the future look like for us?
To the degree anyone could answer that, because who knows. One of the things I would point out before I answer that is this isn't the weather. AI isn't something that's coming from the moon or an asteroid. Like, all of you have agency. All of you have the ability to decide how you do or don't use it. More so than I think is sometimes seems to be the case. The very first thing I think you're going to see is just a better handle on documents. One of the great things about generative AI is it can go into documents and find things in a way that you just harder, you can, way beyond Control F and so on. So I think that that's going to be one of the ways it changes. I think also the ability to generate things with higher quality and speed and so on, I think is also, and I'm not talking about big documents, but often the small things that take up a lot of our time. So I think you're going to find efficiency around the things that drive people nuts first, which is finding that the real information, finding or summarizing things and so on. A little further down the road, as these things become more accurate, I think you'll find automations that are useful. Things like writing RFIs, or I don't want to get too deep into what the automations will be. Some of that will be, again, driven by the market, like what people want to see automated. What won't be automated, and this is maybe the other part, I jumped past this. It's important to know that the thing that makes construction work isn't the paperwork. It's necessary, it's important. It's that there's somebody sitting on site making really, actually quite complicated judgments and decisions that AI is nowhere near being able to do. So the idea is that the paperwork that sets you up to be successful when you're standing there is what AI will be good at. But the complexity of what that is, I mean, sometimes they're not so complex, but often they are. Often it's, well, if I do this, then that's going to do this, or the weather, I mean, there's so much that goes into decisions about swapping a product out, or moving a schedule around, that AI is not good enough. And that world model thing I talked about before is kind of why. Like, it isn't even architected to be able to, it's not like, oh, if we add a little, it'll get good at it. It's fundamentally not good at that now. It doesn't mean they won't get there, but for the moment, the things that make you great at what you do are what AI is not good at. It's almost like two things that complement each other. And I would think of it as an intern who knows nothing about the world but can go look things up for you really well and can move things around. So hopefully that's an answer. I don't know where I would say the world is going to be, because I think there's multiple things going on at once. There's some things on the contract side, there's some things on the off-site and so on, like how we build is kind of being moved around. So I think there's a bunch of things changing. What I do think I can confidently predict is your relationship to data, your relationship to information, and your relationship to documents hopefully will get better.
I think what Hugh's referring to is there are apps now on the market. There are point solutions that are utilizing AI to actually make our jobs easier and more efficient today. And I'd be remiss in not emphasizing the fact that Hugh's company, the Link.ai, he has an app that makes specifications much more accessible and usable. How many of you guys deal with spec books, right? That's all of us, right? When was the last time any of us have read a spec book from cover to cover? I don't think ever.
Everyone does.
I don't think ever in my 30-year construction career have I read a spec book from cover to cover. We all know that there's a lot of really critical information in there. We all know that it's filled with risk for us as business people and as contractors. And so this technology holds in it the promise of making the specifications much more usable by our people in the field, the people with tools, like to get it right the first time. And so I think that, so there are tangible things that AI is doing right now to transform our jobs, and Hugh is on the forefront of this. And the application he's selling is something that your team can use right now to do a better job and reduce your risk.
Thank you. What he said, but more.
Yeah, and I know that didn't sound like a question, did it?
No, that was perfect.
What would you recommend for the people in this room to really understand, other than talking to your kids and having them explain it to you, right? What would you recommend for the people in the room to get more acquainted with and understanding of what AI can do?
Yeah, I think the things I mentioned before, where I've got a webinar that we're talking only about construction. It's not how glorious the world is going to be. It's what are people building and how's it helping? Again, I would go to a ChatGPT. There's another thing called Claude, because of course it is, that you can, for free, go and start working with and do things like ask it things a little more complicated than, what's the capital of Montana? Like, say, hey, I have an email to, like, you can write a little brief to it and say, hey, I'm a construction PM. I need to write an email to a contractor telling them that I'm going to cut their prices in half. Let me make it up and see what comes out of it. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised at how well what it writes works. You're still going to want to tweak it. You're still going to want to copy paste and make some changes. But the point is, I think you're going to be surprised at how some of the things that we struggle with, it'll help get you a head start on. It's not solving the problem. It's just solving step one or even the first couple of steps. So that's a really easy way to do it. I mentioned before, on YouTube, you can watch a 3-minute video, maybe a little more than that, 5-minute video on how to do prompting. And it'll just say, you'll be like, oh, I understand now. It's really not that hard. It's not like you need to. I love that they call it prompt engineering when it's really mostly English. There's not a lot of engineering. It can be, but usually there's just how to write a good prompt. That's not so hard to do, and it'll just give you an understanding of that this is different from Google, and I think it can do some useful stuff.
Great. So who has a question from the audience?
One other thing. Sorry. There is an economist out of University of Toronto who has written a couple of books on AI. That's where that economic inputs thing I wrote. His name is Ajay Agrawal. I'll make sure that the RedTeam. I wouldn't buy his book. If you wouldn't want to hear me say that, just go on YouTube and watch the guy talking about his book. You'll get most of the key points. And it's just an interesting way to think about AI, not as, oh, it can do things like my job, therefore I'm in trouble. More like, oh, it can do parts of my job, and what happens when that happens. It's a way better way to think about how the industry is going to evolve and how you might think about hiring going forward. So back to those questions.
Okay, great. I know we have a question over here.
So thank you for the information on AI. My name is Nick. I'm with CMC Development and Construction, and so I kind of have a two-part question. I just wanted to get a better understanding of how you guys are going to use AI technology and kind of merge it with your RedTeam software, and then, so I'll answer that one, then I'll do my second one.
Actually, one of the things that we were discussing this morning was a hypothetical. You're familiar with the Field Lens app that we have that's tracking day-to-day collaborative interactions in the field. These are things that don't typically make it onto a daily report, but imagine having the capability of an AI tool that goes out and looks at what everybody did on the job site the prior day or the prior week, looks at the specific interactions among the parties on the job site, reviews that against the daily log for those days, compares it to what's in the specifications, like maybe something was installed. You might get a message that says, we don't see a record of test X having been performed prior to the installation of Y, right? We know that this happens all the time, and we know that, by some measures, 10% of our work effort on commercial construction projects is rework and remediation, right? Well, that's where it lives, right? Somebody realizes a test wasn't run prior to installation of concrete, for example, and then we're figuring out, well, how could we core drill? How could we test what's underneath? And so we expend a lot of energy on those things. But imagine a system that's going out, looking at the specs, looking at the contract, looking at the daily reports, and looking at who said what to each other on the job site contemporaneously, and giving us a real-time heads up on those things so that we don't make those same mistakes. I think that's the kind of application, that's the kind of functionality and capability that we're looking at in the future.
Okay, thank you. And then my kind of back-end question is, you kind of mentioned that AI helps more so on the junior level than the senior level, as far as like updating information for different vendors and things like that. Do you see RedTeam having any plans of merging vendors? Because I know that there may be instances where there may be one subcontractor may have two different profiles, but you can't necessarily delete them both. Do you ever see any plans of merging those two? Well, this is some catching, I'm sorry, so that way it registers both as one instead of two separate entities?
That's a great question, actually, and it's a product question, and I don't want to get in trouble with any of my colleagues about talking about things too far in the future that is not in the application. We have something we refer to as RedTeam Marketplace, where there is essentially deduplication of the vendor profiles. So that is on our roadmap. I'm looking at our product people, and they're gonna have words with me later.
You didn't give a date.
I didn't give a date. But yes, it's something that I think there's a lot of value in, something that we can definitely create more opportunities. Just the pre-construction implications of that alone are, I think, are transformational.
All right, well, thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, thank you, Hugh, for that presentation. It's also my third time watching the presentation, and I do get a lot of value out of it. One of the things that I wanted to mention to everyone, I am a heavy ChatGPT user, and I just want to point out that no one is better at your job than you are. So if you're putting together an estimate and you're putting together a scope of work, for example, you have human intuition, you have experience working on similar jobs. So ChatGPT is not going to put together a scope of work that's going to be better than your intuition and your experience with that similar scope. So a good way to use ChatGPT, for example, is to go ahead and create the scope of work for the project and then maybe upload it to ChatGPT and say, is there something I'm missing? Also, another way to use ChatGPT is to compare an estimate that you put together on or download it from RedTeam Flex, upload it into ChatGPT, and maybe upload also a budget for a job that you did that was similar in scope. And ChatGPT can come back to you and say, well, maybe you're missing some components of your estimate that was allocated in change orders on that project that you did in the past that's very similar in scope. So there's a lot of ways to use it, but it's definitely not going to be better at doing the things that you do now, where you're applying human intuition, you're thinking about it, or you have experience in that field.
If I may add on that, I didn't talk about that enough here, but actually having it look at work and just be like another voice often is really valuable. It's not that it's, to your point, it's not replacing you, it's saying, did you think of this? Or just expanding the things that you might consider. It isn't making decisions for you, but it's just another voice that might look at a document you've written, or really, we're just talking mostly about documents, but is there something missing in here, anything I should consider? It's not gonna catch everything, but it's free. So, okay, let's use it and see what happens. And sometimes it'll be like, yeah, I knew that, and other times, oh, you know what, that's right. And just that's worth it, because again, it's so cheap, it's so fast, it's so easy. Those 1 in 3 times where it's like, oh yeah, that's right. You might have thought of that with more time, but time is one of those things no one has enough of. Just thinking about it as another little resource, we don't have to go bother someone else and take their time. Hey, can you, another pair of eyes on this email or this document, whatever it is really valuable. And again, it's the cost of it is so low and so easy that it's worth giving it a shot.
Okay, we've got about time for one more question.
One more question.
Can you tell me about your experience with AI-generated quantity takeoffs?
Yes, I was thought, because you probably have some too. One of the problems, I've mentioned before that AI is good at fuzzy documents, like in a way that classic software struggles with. However, the world's loaded with some pretty sloppy stuff. So what I've seen from takeoff, AI takeoff is pretty good. There are often things it's not quite as good at. You know what I mean? Whether it's elevations or some part of the document it might struggle with. I think what's important for all, whether it's, I happen to know Togo better than there's some others that I've spoken to as well on the podcast. It's important not to think of them as replacing somebody so much as augmenting someone. So it's like, you know what, if this can get me 80% there and I can eyeball it, that's a ton of time that you saved. So you go from being a generator to an editor. You know what I mean? Like you're approving things and catching things instead of having to go through the grind of doing it all yourself. So I think they're quite valuable there. This is a general point about AI tools, to be honest, is humans are so good at catching literally everything if you can focus. That an AI doesn't, because it doesn't have that top-down model that allows it to really deal with truly new stuff. So you need to think of it as it's saving me 80% of the mind-numbing labor to get there. But I still have to go in and eyeball it, and I've saved a lot of time, but it hasn't totally replaced me or replaced somebody. I find a lot of software falls down when the expectation is, well, I still have to go look at it. Yes, you do, but you're looking at it for 20 minutes, not 3 hours. So it's worth looking at, for sure.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is I know there are a number of products being released to the market right now. I do know the folks at Toggle, they're actually being built by a general contractor. I don't know if you knew that, but I do think that when you're in the business and you're creating a tool for the business, it gives you a level of insight into the functionality and the capability, like a pragmatic approach that I think is really helpful. And so I'd be looking at like the origin stories of the different products that are being released to the market, and I think having experience in the industry, doing what we do, I think is helpful. And I think that's all the time we have.
She's playing music.
I am playing the music. You can't hear it, but it's up here. Okay, well, we could talk for hours on a lot of the topics that we're going to talk about today. So if you have ideas, if you have questions, feel free to come speak to any of us. You'll see our red teamers around the room, but we have Patrick here and Betsy here from our product teams today. And we're going to have some time around the 1 o'clock hour where if you have a burning, hey, this would be really cool, to share your feedback on where we could incorporate AI into our Red Team solutions. We like to hear your feedback. We make updates and changes to our software based on what you guys are experiencing and where you'd like to see it and where you feel like it would be most helpful. So come talk to one of us and we'll take it down and make good notes on where you guys would like to see it as active practicing users of our software. So thanks, you guys. We're going to take a short break. We're going to come back at 10 o'clock and have our panel speakers. I'll be leading our panel discussion with 3 of our speakers today. So feel free to take a break, grab a snack. Restrooms are to the right, to the right, to the